My name is Lenna Cumberbatch. I'm a Black woman. I have glasses on. I have short quiffed afro haircut. I'm wearing a red shirt with a Star Trek rainbow pin on the collar. In the background, you've got curtains in the wall. So today, I want us to focus on looking at and understanding what we mean by, first of all, what we talk about when we talk about diversity. What is it we're actually talking about? I'm starting with a quote from Bell Hooks, and it's the concept around, the quote is, "Honesty and openness is always the foundation of insightful dialogue." And I think that's going to be really key with the work that we do in diversity and inclusion. It's really important to understand the realities of our circumstances, our experience, our situations, what we do, and also what we don't know. So I have here an image. It's a cartoon picture. In the background, there's a desk with a chair behind it and a telephone on it. In the foreground, there's two people facing each other. The person to the left is wearing a blue jacket with a stripy yellow and red tie, a white shirt underneath, black trousers. They are pale skin and have balding gray hair. The person they're pointing at, has long blonde hair, a red jacket, a blue shirt, a black skirt, and blue shorts, high-heeled shoes. It says, "We need to focus on diversity. Your goal is to hire people who all look different, but think just like me." That's not the way that I think about diversity. And just to be completely clear, absolutely not what we mean by diversity. But there are sometimes still these concepts of, I just need somebody who looks a bit different, but fits into my environment. And so being able to understand what you mean, what I mean, and what we mean generally about diversity. We've had this evolution of terms in the UK, at least in much of the US, where we are now in this place where we talk about diversity, equality, equity, and inclusion. But this comes from a variety of different movements over decades: civil rights, multiculturalism, equal rights, equal opportunities, social justice, and even diversity management. That's a whole different part of my dissertation. Let's not go there. But I think it's really important for us to understand this concept about what diversity is and how different people understand it, engage with it. So these are different ways I'm illustrating right here of how we use the term diversity. And the different language, different representation. I'm not going to try and pronounce any of them, but I think it's interesting to see that there are two different terms that are used in German and two different terms used in Dutch, just as an example of what that looks like. And even in the sign language examples, there are two different ways of utilizing what diversity it means. So Samir talked about this understanding of local knowledge and the importance of that. And absolutely, I think it is the assumption that you know what's going on cannot be made. From a diversity and inclusion perspective, you really have to get people who have expertise in your area, in your region, and even your neighborhood sometimes, which will make a massive difference. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, one of the first things I want you to really think about and understand is, what are your motivations? Now, it's all well and good to say, I want to do this because it's the right thing to do. But sometimes the reality is you're doing it for business reasons. So is your reason for the business case, it's good for business? Is it the moral case, it's the right thing to do? Or is it integrity? It's integral to who you are. It's part of your overall ethos of practice. It's your identity as much as it's anything else. And so the way that you approach what your motivations are for this work will often dictate how you can engage with that work going forwards. The next thing to consider is your level of commitment to this. Where are you on the scale? So are you interested in being at the beginning or at the end of the top of the scale? So be realistic about what you want to do, who you want to be, how much effort you're willing to put into this work. Because if you want to, all you're interested in is a compliance model, and that's totally fine, where you meet the legal minimums of what's required for equality, diversity, inclusion, that's fine, but be realistic about that. Be honest, be open about this. We're just going to do what we need to do at the basics. If you're more interested in the conventional method, which is utilizing the already established good practice and keeping up with your peers, then that's great. I mean, that's also very interesting, very good place to be, but accept that this is where you want to be in the sale. And my third idea in this area is being innovative, or the cutting edge, which is regularly revisiting and implementing new and ambitious initiatives, a leader in the sector, the early adopter, so as it were. The thing about these different levels is that they have different levels of commitment required for them and different levels of investment engaged in them. So understand where you are in this process. Intentions are brilliant, but what does that actually mean in the end? And so being able to understand and recognize where you sit in this process is really. So when we first talk about diversity and inclusion, talk about this concept of the dialogue. And as communications people, and I saw from the service earlier on, you know all about dialogue. But let's have a look at what I often see when I talk to people who are engaging in diversity and inclusion. First of all, Let's start this conversation. Let's talk about diversity. Yay! The next thing is we're going to analyze the data. And I love data. I really, really love data. It's really important. And then, okay, let's do some action. And that's the end. And as you know, that's not how dialogue works. Unfortunately, they then get to the place and say, well, what happened? Did anything change? Did we accomplish the things that we set out to accomplish? Unfortunately, more often than not, people don't focus on smart objectives and actions, and because they're not having dialogue, they're having unilateral conversations. And so my focus area is, and I won't give you a full dissertation on this, just a general introduction to specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound objectives, and understanding the difference between what I usually see, which looks like this: encourage new audiences to visit the museum. Great, fabulous intention. But what does that actually mean? Who are these new audiences? What does encourage mean? When should they, how many people, how many visits are we talking about? So I want you to compare this broad, intentional, positively intentioned overall objective to something a bit more smart. By 2024, achieve a 10% increase in visitors from the local Polish community via a targeted advertising campaign. It's got a time limit to it. It's got a specific measure to it. It identifies a specific group and it tells you how. And those are the differences that I often are absent from the work that we're doing in this space. And it means that you cannot go from this, idea of having a good conversation, creating this brilliant, amazing action plan to whatever the next step is. Now, this can be translated into, there are a bunch of different ways that you can engage in this. And I'm not going to read you the full list of these items here, but the idea being that an objective that you want to achieve needs to be smart in order to be able to achieve it. It needs to have times and dates. It needs to have measures. It needs to be specific about what you're trying to do. But let's look at the first one. Partner with 3 local communities by the end of 2023 for at least 2 targeted activities. So that could translate into an objective which says improve diversity of museum visitors by 10% by the end of 2023, identifying contact relevant local communities, discuss a partnership and possible activities, conduct 2 activities in partnership. The thing about laying it out in this format is that you can say, yes, I did that. Yes, I did that. Yes, I did that. And that's really helpful in being able to see where you're progressing. And that turns into one of these giant sized action plans, which is a living document. It changes. It might be that, oh dear, pandemic's happened and all of our timelines have gotten pushed back and now we can't do this. I mean, you change that. It's a moving, livable docket, but it needs to be something that you can adapt and adjust, and you can monitor your progress as you go along. Next, thinking about is that next step, and that's regarding the resource and review of what you're doing. What do you need to achieve your successes, and how do you know it's working? You saw in the previous slide, in the success measures, I've got 12 identified contacts, 6 have been contacted, 3 meetings have been scheduled, 2 events have been conducted with partners. So what do you need to make those successes happen? This is my logo. I am an inclusive perspective. And what I do is want to highlight to people that you're not getting the full picture if you're not doing this work, right? So I've got a picture of shutters, various levels of closing, camera shutters. And so to the far left, it's quite closed. There's a very little bit of image between it, and you can see sort of some mild coloring. And as it moves step by step to the right, you can see that the shutter opens up, the colors inside get brighter and brighter and more vibrant. And the arrow finally, where you can see the full spectrum of color, is about forward movement and progress. And so if you're not engaging in this work, you're only seeing part of the picture and you're not seeing it in full life. So one way is to make sure that we're doing that is, are you resourcing it appropriately? Have you allocated time? Have you allocated people? Have you allocated funds? Now, you may not need funds because it should be something that's embedded as a part of your everyday work that you're doing. But if you want to splash out on something bigger and different that you hadn't done before, that you think will be particularly useful, then there is a case then for that existence. Remember, if you're not doing diversity and inclusion work properly, then you're not seeing the full picture. So that should be an everyday part of your picture. If you're only getting one of these pictures, then you're not seeing everything that there is. Now, this goes back to what I was mentioning earlier on before in terms of this concept of reviewing before. And so, do you want to be compliant, conventional, or innovative? Because if you want to be innovative, then you're definitely going to need to make sure that you've allocated the amount of time and people that you need to be able to work on this area. The dialogue cycle, I talked about this earlier on in the starting place. And what you often see is that, that dialogue to start the conversation, the analyze the situation, and then take action. What I'm suggesting is that that's not where it ends. We then have to dialogue again, review, reflect on what you've done, adapt what you've done, because sometimes it will work, sometimes it won't. And sometimes you just want to find ways of making it better. But then you start all over again. It's a continuous circle. Go around and around and around, come back to it. Because every time something in the world changes, you have to change and adapt to it as well. Finally, so yeah, don't get stuck in the take action space in the dialogue. Let's move on. Finally, my final point comes back to the intentions are cheap, at least when compared with realizations. And that's from Mintzberg, one of our strategy experts in the sector. My favorite cartoons are the Pinky and the Brain from the 90s. And every night there's a cartoon, and they escape from their cage and get out and run around. And Pinky asks Brain, what are we going to do tonight, Brain? And Brain says, plan to take over the world. Well, this is not a very smart action or objective. But nonetheless, they get out every time and they make all these big, massive, complicated plans, have a load of fun. But at the end of the evening, without that smart action, without that objective, they just end up back up in their cage again. So I ask, please, if you want to actually make changes and make things real and reality, please remember the smart action, and happy to help on that front. Cheers.